rock solid. Oh, you lovers, stand with me. Rise in spirit. Oh, you lovers, rise in me. Sing together. Oh, you lovers, sing with me. Hello and welcome to Elemental Castings. My name is Thorn Coyle, and this is my bi-monthly tour through the elements of life, the sacred forces of air, fire, water, earth, and ether or spirit. And today I have a special guest, Christopher Penczak. Christopher Penczak is a modern witch, healer, and spiritual teacher, synthesizing a variety of spiritual paradigms into a holistic magical model. He seeks to build bridges between magical communities and systems. Christopher is the co-founder of the Temple of Witchcraft tradition, an organization, and the author of over 16 books and CD sets, including the award-winning Temple of Witchcraft series. And today we're going to talk a little bit about his forthcoming book called The Witch's Coin, Prosperity and Money Magic. His website is christopherpenczak.com. That last name is Penczak. And as usual, you can find me at thorncoyle.com. So let's all take a breath together, you listeners, and Christopher and I will breathe together to tune our energies. And just let yourself settle into your beautiful body, which is the home of Earth. And I'd like to thank the Earth and bless the Earth and call it to be with us, the power of the physical realm, the power of money and food and good health, the power of silence, and the power of deep knowing. And as always, I'd like to start by saying, Holy Mother, in whom we live, move, and have our being, from you all things emerge, and unto you all things return. Christopher, did you have an invocation for us today?
I would love to. I call upon the Great Mother, the goddess of the earth, and the goddess of the starry heavens, to see the stars within us, within our body, and to see our body amongst the stars. I call upon the Lord of life, and the Lord of death, the Lord of light, and the Lord of darkness, to hold open the way so we may see spirit flowing through matter, and matter flowing to spirit. Blessed be.
Blessed be. I'd also like to call Freya and Frere today. Since I was preparing for this podcast this morning, they became very active in my thoughts and my presence, so I'd like to invite the Lords of Plenty, the Golden Ones, Freya, goddess of love and sex and prosperity, and Frere, the god of prosperity and sex and love as well, the god of business, the goddess of battle and courage. You golden ones, you bright ones, you who love these earthly realms and all the creatures in these earthly realms, we ask for your blessing here today for all who are listening. Hail and welcome.
Hail and welcome.
So, Christopher, this is a really fertile topic. Sorry for the pun. There's so much here to talk about earth and prosperity and money and prosperity consciousness. So I'm wondering that my first question for you is, as a magical practitioner, have you always felt that you have had a good relationship to the material realms, including prosperity and wealth, or is this something you've had to train and grow into?
I think it's definitely something that I've had to contemplate and train and grow into. Before I got involved as a spiritual teacher and, for lack of a better word, professional witch, I was a musician and an artist. And there seems to be an archetype both with the pagans and the artists and the musicians and anybody in type of a creative, non-corporate pursuit that has almost that archetype of the starving artist. So I enjoyed my work, but I wasn't necessarily making enough money to really make a living off of it.
Right.
So it was definitely something that, even in my initial training in witchcraft, I don't think emphasized enough the idea of the sacredness of the physical world, and that there was nothing inherently wrong with money. I think I still kind of came in with the programming that, to be spiritual was to take a vow of poverty or to not think of money and home and comfort as important, which is really kind of silly, but that was emphasized in the training that I received. So I think I had to go out and my own experiences with it kind of opened the door to think that, the body is sacred and sexuality is sacred, so then comfort is sacred and food is sacred, and, really kind of opening my eyes to that.
I had to go through the same process. I have working class roots and came, part of my childhood, we were quite poor. And then when my social consciousness developed simultaneously with my consciousness about paganism and the craft, it all dovetailed into having issues with money and a lot of trouble with money. And it's taken me a long time as well to say, well, if I'm of a non-transcendent religion, if I'm of a religion that celebrates the earth and the physical and good food, good sex, a religion that wants to be in a healthy body, then should not that also include having a better relationship with money and with material things, and come to a greater balance, because poverty consciousness is just as much of an imbalance as greed is. And that's something I think a lot of us, particularly in the pagan subculture, need to rethink.
Well, I definitely, I came from a different background where my family was upper middle class and fairly well-to-do, and I thought if I didn't follow in that kind of corporate footsteps, I had to give up something. And it was a very interesting concept to finally embrace that, no, I don't actually have to give up anything. I can have everything that I want and need to fulfill my will. But I have found it interesting being on the other side of it, because along with my witchcraft and paganism, I'm also involved in a lot of holistic health and New Age practices and metaphysical practices based in theosophy and ascension. And it's funny that those who really emphasize transcending and going beyond the body, or thinking of the body as not sacred and the world is not necessarily sacred, that there's something better beyond, seem to have little problem with money. The ones, that are really see the earth as sacred have a really hard time with it, which I'm still trying to wrap my head around.
That is very strange.
Yeah. Yeah, have you noticed that, though?
I have noticed that. And in reaction, I think, to the dominant culture, and then in another reaction against the New Age community, I think we instantiate our poverty consciousness and
I would agree.
Not supporting each other in our work, which is really unfortunate. I know so many artists, teachers, massage therapists, and shop owners who just are not supported by their communities, and that's really unfortunate.
Right. No, I wholeheartedly agree, and that's a bit of why I wrote the book, because I wanted to kind of examine both the spellcrafting kind of practical things you could do, but I also wanted to look at really the kind of deeper spiritual underpinnings, but also talk about the practical, not spellcraft, but the practical business planning. I mean, as I went into the music business before I got involved in publishing, it was the business side of things that really interested me. I got involved in marketing and publicity and that type of research and sales, and trying to really understand, also as a pagan practitioner, how to be a better business person. If I really want to make a living and talking to store owners, the flip side of that is that sometimes people really have this mentality that if you build it, then people will come. And I think that's great, and I hope for that, but I think you also need a business plan and an advertising plan and, know how to work in the world as everybody else does. And I think a lot of people who are magical think, well, I created a store, or I started a business, why aren't people flocking to me? So it's trying to find the balance between those two.
I think that's a really good point. It's one thing I actually am still learning in working with Freyr, the god, is he's really good at business and wants to help people with business. And that's another thing that I would love for people to open up to, is this thought that we can use our spiritual practice in all areas of our lives, including, we don't just ask the gods or the universe for prosperity. We can ask for greater business acumen. Right. For example, that would actually be more helpful to us than just doing money spell after money spell that doesn't really have much direction or focus.
Right. And even when we're doing spells, I think it's always good to focus on, well, what is the end result that you want? It's great to get that money to pay the rent this month, but if your goal and your spell is financial stability, what are the skills that you need? It's kind of like any other magical practice. If you want to be a better reader, you don't just do a spell to be a better reader. You ask to bring in the resources and the teachings and the experiences that will help you be a better reader, or whatever your goal might be. I have this one real interesting kind of spirit contact that's from the fairy realm, and she's helping me with some of the projects and the businesses that I'm setting in motion for our temple. And she actually came to me very much like a businesswoman, which really shocked me, and asked for a business plan and said, what is your goals? What is your mission statement? How do you think you're going to go to it? And as part of the ritual, basically it was kind of like a business proposal to the spirit world.
Right.
And it was very, very profound, but it really showed me that, when we mean business, they mean business, and they're very much able to help us with those resources, but we have to, get the skills to back them up at the same time.
I've found that kind of help from my guides and contacts as well. One thing I'm thinking of right now that's mildly tangential but actually central to this conversation is another power of the earth, which is the power to keep silent. And the way that works in the sorts of operations we're talking about here is that cultivation of stillness within ourselves. Because so often when we're seeking something, we're seeking outside of ourselves rather than starting with our foundation internally. And there's a lot of confusion about what do we really want and what do we really need. That the need for focusing that you're talking about comes for me from this basis of having sat in stillness.
Right.
And then looking at my parts and saying, oh, there's part of me that wants to be successful in life and successful in business, but there are other parts of me that might have shame around that, or might be frightened of it, or might have issues of anger come up. And unless I come from that place of stillness, I never have a chance to notice what is tripping up my prayer and my spell work and my connection with what I truly desire in life.
I would agree with that totally. And I think in that stillness, for me, a big kind of key word for it is will. And not just will, as I like to say with a little w, but will with that capital W. What's your divine will or your true will? And it's in that stillness, it's in that meditation, it's in that regular practice that we start to get the clues of what that will is, and do we accept it? And, if that is our soul's purpose, are we ready to accept it? Are we not ready to accept it? What would prevent us from accepting it? And then how do we implement it from there? So when I even think about business plans and acumen in the physical world or having the resources that I need, I'm like, what is the ultimate result for it? 'Cause
right.
In the end, I'm getting very sparse and Spartan to say, is this necessary? If I need the resources, is it necessary to fulfill what my purpose is here to do? And if I don't need that resource at the moment, I'm not going to worry about it. It's nice to have things that are nice, and I'm not necessarily living like a hermit, but at the same time, I'm not getting hung up on the things that aren't necessary in that moment. And it's the daily practice. It's, for me, the meditative practice that really gets me to that place.
So you're pointing to something that I think is important to this conversation, and that is this concept of what is necessary. Diana Paxson talks about that need, the need rune is coming to what is absolutely necessary to us. And so what is necessary to my divine work, to my larger will, my true will purpose, and what resources do I need for that, as you have said? I'm just restating this to get to this point that we can embrace things that help us enact our will in the world and that help us walk in our state of divine purpose. And we don't need to worry about coming to a place where we're going to end up wanting 5 yachts and 10 homes and, diamonds and wanting to, oppress other people. There seems to be something in the consciousness of our subculture, more so people who consider themselves to be of the craft than, say, people who are ceremonial magicians, that if we want for these things and try to hone our business sense and try to really work with spell working and prayer working and will development in this way, we're going to end up like the culture that we don't like.
Right.
We're going to end up wanting all of these hyper-consumeristic things. And I think that that's a strange emotional state that we really need to address.
I would agree. And I think, sadly, I think a lot of people come into paganism, and I guess myself included, so it's not too sad because it is a gateway into it, but come into it from a very reactionary place.
Right.
You know, I came into it because I was an ex-Catholic, and I wanted to get into what was as far away from Catholicism as I thought I could be. Little did I know how much they'd have in common. But, you know, in my mind at the time, I was like, wow, what do I need to... I went into Shinto and some Buddhism and said that didn't really have the practice that spoke to me, and then found paganism and witchcraft. But it was very reactionary to try to do something spiritual that seemed to be the opposite of where I was coming from. Mm-hmm. And looking at the Catholic Church and thinking, well, they have these resources and this, you know, property and money and art and the collections that they have, yet what are they really doing with it? And I do think there's Catholic organizations that do wonderful charitable things. I'm not necessarily saying that. But coming from a place of wounding from the Catholic Church, you become very reactionary and say, you know, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be money hoarding. And then you go into something, you think, oh, it's very natural and it's free, and paganism and witchcraft just go out to nature. You don't necessarily need anything. And to a certain extent, that can be true, but there's so much deeper about it. And when you kind of take on that baggage of I don't want to be like mainstream culture, then that carries its own set of lessons. And for me, it's that very reactionary phase where a lot of people who are ceremonial magicians don't seem to have that same running from someplace, you know, when they come to ceremonial magic. Like most ceremonial magicians I know, if they didn't start out in paganism, are okay with their former Christianity, if that's where they were coming from, and, you know, see it as a further step into developing their will. So for me, it was a very reactionary pose, and as I counsel people, I feel like a lot of them have that. And the kind of more I compare and contrast to the metaphysical world outside of witchcraft and even outside of ceremonial magic and more of the New Age practices, and even when we look at things that have become very popular right now, like The Secret or the Law of Attraction, or things that essentially have some really good ideas and some really good mainstream concepts for people that are out there, I think that sometimes encourages the mentality of, oh, I'm going to want the 5 yachts, and I'm going to, you know, have this process where I can put out an intention and the universe is ever abundant, so I can get anything and everything that I want. I do believe that works, but at the same time, when we look at it rationally, we know Mother Earth's resources are going to run out, whether it be, you know, petroleum-based engines that we have or for a variety of reasons, the other resources, food resources, energy resources. So we can't say everything is ever abundant in the way I learned from a lot of New Age teachers. But I think the secret of prosperity, the secret of abundance, is that you have to give up what no longer serves. When you're fulfilling your will, you get what is necessary for you, and then you let go of what's not necessary, and what's not necessary for you might be absolutely necessary for somebody else.
That's right.
So it's this whole power of exchange, but if you constantly think of it as a hoarding mentality, then you don't really get what I actually really like the word prosperity as opposed to abundance.
I always use prosperity instead of abundance. I don't want an abundance of bills.
Right, exactly.
I don't want an abundance of ants in my kitchen.
And prosperity really implies that you're prospering. Mm-hmm. But like in nature, for something to prosper, leaves have to fall, you know, snake has to shed its skin, all these things. You have to let go of some stuff that you have so you can receive new blessings. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a component that a lot of people forget, even just in kind of a basic magical cleaning house. You know, what do I no longer need? What are the resources I can give up and free that stagnant energy so I can create a space for something new? It's not about hoarding, but as a sun sign Taurus, I do like to hoard. So that's really been a great lesson for me about letting go what's not necessary in accord with my will.
I'd like to say a few things about what you just brought up. The first is that enacting our true will is never reactionary.
Right.
If we're in reaction to something, we are not walking towards our true will. We're not building towards our divine purpose. The other thing I want to talk about is in runes, the Gebo or Gifu rune is 2 lines coming together, and it is a line of things meeting, that exchange you're talking about, that a gift always requires me showing up fully to my life. And that showing up enacts the magic that gifts will come towards me. Mm-hmm. The other thing I want to say, I've been saying this a lot about the whole law of attraction and The Secret, is there's a partial truth to it, just as you spoke to. However, it also does not take into account something that we as pagan magic workers I think, need to keep paramount in our minds all the time, that we're part of a holistic system.
Absolutely.
We don't live in isolation from other people's will and desire. We also don't live in isolation of the fact that sometimes people do bad things and a toxic waste dump gets built in our community, and some of the denizens of our community get cancer.
Right.
It doesn't mean that they attracted and willed cancer into their life. It means, no, we need to pay attention to our placement in the world, in the larger processes of Earth, and that includes the processes of humanity as part of nature. So, yes, I want to be centered in myself and enacting my will and attempting to meet the gifts that are coming. And I also want to be aware of what's happening with my community, both small and large. Mm-hmm. And how can I help? How can I be of help to others around me? I think that's another thing that helps our magic. And
Absolutely.
it's something that some of the older, more ceremonial-based teachers talked about a lot, and that was service. And I talk about service a lot in my second book, Kissing the Limitless. Service can get a bad rap because we can think we need to be subservient or give our life force over to something. But actually, if I'm strong and if I'm in a place of prosperity, then I have a lot to give. And my life can be of greater service to those around me. And then that in and of itself generates more gifts coming my way. Haven't you found that in your own life?
I absolutely agree. One of the key words that I really like looking, although I don't strive away from service. In fact, in the system that I teach in the Temple of Witchcraft, we have 5 different levels. And then the 5th level is a dual mystery of both the mysteries of resurrection on the personal inner world and the mysteries of service. Once you've reborn, what do you do with it? How do you bring it out into the world? But a key word that I really like that really speaks to what you're saying is reciprocity.
Nice.
And different magical styles have different views, and some have more of a commanding view of the universe or just a simple manifestation through thoughts. But my own personal practice is very much about reciprocity with the rest of the cosmos, whether that be physical, tangible nature, whether that be the spirit world, and I believe physical, tangible nature is inhabited by the spirit world simultaneously. Mm-hmm. But the idea that if the spirits are always helping us, what are we giving back to the spirits? If nature is helping us, what are we giving back to nature? If community is helping us, what are we giving back to community? And I think if you don't have that exchange, there's a great imbalance. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of the whole prosperity key. What do I take in? What do I give up? What do I bring forth and manifest in my life? And what do I let go and offer to others in their life? And I think service is really a vehicle for which that to happen. When a lot of people talk about doing spirit work and they talk about here we have all these guides that want to heal us and teach us and help us manifest prosperity and joy and love, and the angels and the fairies and whoever it may be are all trying to help you, why is that? Because I actually have found the spirit world supremely helpful and so wonderful in anything I could possibly ask. But why is that? And one of the teachings I believe from my spirit contacts is that the spirit world really wants to help us, because out of every 100 people they help with a money spell or a job spell or a love spell, maybe 50 will really get something more out of it. And then out of that 50, you might have a smaller partition of that really go on to be priests and priestesses, and from that really go on to serve. So they figure if they help the largest number of people, then enough people will have reciprocity and exchange and truly be gates between these different kingdoms, these different worlds. And I think that's the key to our own health and success.
I agree, and there's been an important component for me in coming to that place that you're talking about, that place of reciprocity, and that is shifting my thinking to one of knowing really deeply that I am an ally and a partner and a co-creator with all the spirits, with the gods, with all the realms seen and unseen. I need to take my rightful place and step into my power. I see a lot of people petitioning in such a way that makes them feel less than the spirit world or less than the deities that they're in relationship with. And to me, that's just like then any other abusive relationship,
Absolutely.
We need, in order to be effective in all the worlds and to really be of help, we need to be in our power and to acknowledge that we're co-creators.
I absolutely agree, and one of the images that I really like is trippy as some of my students might think of it is. I'm a big believer in the age of Aquarius, whatever that may mean for a lot of people. But the shifting of the ages and the age of Horus or Aeon of Horus, however you'd like to place it, that the way I learned it is we're really shifting from a vertical relationship with divinity, where we see divinity primarily in the last 2,000 years as God the Father above us, and we're asking for, or supplicating to, as now we're going to Aquarius, and that's really about lateral relationships. It's about counsel, it's about circle, it's about every being in the circle having a voice. And we might all have different talents and abilities, including the gods, the angels, the fairies, the elders, but we each have something that we're bringing to the table, and we're just as necessary in that circuit. And if we don't show up, then the circle doesn't form. And if they don't show up, the circle doesn't form. So we need to kind of come into counsel with the other spirit worlds. I was recently talking with some of our mutual friends, Raven Gramassi and Stephanie Taylor, and we're talking about there's this great kind of schism going on that I've noticed amongst some of my students and community members of people really bringing that, what I often saw as a Christian paradigm, as the gods as parents, but you're the little child in supplication to the parents, and bringing that to their witchcraft and really looking at things and saying, I'm praying to the gods and the gods are not answering my prayers. What's wrong with them? What's wrong with my prayers? And getting very agitated about it, rather than thinking, well, what are you doing with the gods? Or, I think I definitely look at the god and goddess as in a cosmic sense as parents. But I think one of the things I've really noticed is in my own life with my own physical genetic parents is the transition into an adult relationship with my parents. And I think Aquarius is really, if we're going to look at divinity as parental, we need to be able to transition into our adult relationship with parental divinity. They're still elder and wise, but, you know, we have to enter that relationship where we're equals and caretakers and reciprocal.
And for me, that's a big part of hopefully what our spiritual practices are helping us grow towards. I often say that the big part of my teaching is in hope that I'm helping to grow more adults. You know, I look around at the political realm and, you know, all the different problems in our current society. And a lot of them are really because people haven't stepped into adulthood and haven't really claimed their power in ways that are healthy.
Right. I think of it often as cosmic adulthood. You might have physical adulthood entering a certain age or biological period, but I think spiritually we enter like a cosmic adulthood, and I know some adults who are 16, and I know some adults who haven't reached there until their 60s and 70s. So it's something that's not time-dependent, but more spiritual awareness-dependent.
That's a nice way of putting it. So I want to talk about a bugaboo, an elephant in the middle of the room. And it's something that is shifting, but it still comes up. I was teaching in Denver and talking to the owner of Spiritwise, who is, it's a fabulous shop and it's a great community service. And, she's a good business person. Yeah, and she still gets flack from people for doing things to make money.
Right.
And providing this space for people and being a business person. Like, they just want her space to exist without the reality that she needs to be a business person. And when I came home from that trip, I got some criticism online from someone who felt I should teach all my workshops for free. And this is still such a strong strain in the craft in particular. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Well, this is a common story, and, the experience you had and the store owner as well are stories that I've experienced myself and the store owners that I know in my area and traveling across the country. And it's a really tough thing because I empathize with the people who are really speaking that way because they're coming, in my opinion, from that place of reaction that we just talked about. Even if we think of the historical idea of how this come into witchcraft, how this come into paganism, my belief, and as far as all my research has led me to, the first place it was really spoken out was Gerald Gardner's Ardanes, Laws of Witchcraft. And at the time, as you get more into the research of that, he was really having a reaction against things like the Fraudulent Mediums Act.
Right.
And wanting to disassociate himself with Christianity and kind of create a colorful flair for it. But there's some evidence to say that, he was completely willing to charge for OTO initiations if he was going to go in that direction and just decided not to. So it wasn't that he had a big moral, compunction that money and spirituality should be completely separate. It's just whether he received that from his craft teachers or whether that was just part of his shtick to kind of give it an older kind of vibe than what he actually had. I don't know, but that's where it seemed to come in, and that's where a lot of people kind of take it. I think the people who can understand commerce and spirituality, haven't been community builders on that level, whether it be a store, whether it be a festival, whether it be, a pagan pride. All those things cost money in the sense you have to rent a place and you have to bring people in. And I travel quite a bit, just as you do, to teach, and often the complaint is, well, can't you come out over here? And I'd be like, okay, these are, usually my usual terms. I need my flights covered, and I need to make some type of business if I'm going away and to be able to pay my own rent. And people are like, oh, I thought you'd just, fly out for free, and, well, how dare you ask for money? And on the reaction side that I often have is, how dare you ask me to, pay for all my expenses to fly halfway across the country? Right. So I empathize with, yet I'm also on the other side of it. So it's very hard to speak to that, because I think in the end the communities that's the prevalent view, they lose their stores, and they lose their centers, and they lose their pagan pride days, and they lose their festivals, because there's nobody that realizes that the way that we have in our world right now is a process of exchange. Unless we introduce something like a tithing, unless we introduce something like a congregation, which I don't think really any of us want to be a mimic of the Catholic or other, types of Christian church organizations. I don't think that's going to change. My belief and kind of my ethic about it is I actually took craft classes and paid for them when I first started. So it was never that big of a deal for me. It wasn't only until I got into the greater community that I realized what a phenomenon that was. I believe as an ethical minister who's not having a congregation that supports me is that people, the best way I could deal with it is people pay for the service. So rather than having some type of monthly donation to nebulously fund something, that, if they come for a class, then I charge a reasonable amount for the class. If they come for a healing session, I charge a reasonable amount for the healing session. And for the most part, that's really worked. I don't think you're ever going to satisfy everyone and every critic out there. And to those people, I totally understand where they're coming from for what they're thinking. And, they don't have to participate in community at that level, but they shouldn't necessarily be shocked when that community goes away or doesn't have a space to practice and to gather.
Yeah, I think that's true. And for the most part, I feel really well supported by people. They want me to come.
Right.
They know I have to pay my rent as well and feed myself. And so they know it costs money. And, I also try to make sure that almost always there's some kind of scholarships available, financial aid, that sort of thing, to keep the community healthy and viable. But I also think, I really do think it came in with Gardner, because when we think of disparate examples such as the witch or the shaman who was supported by the whole village to do his or her work, or we think of the great Greek temples that A, had very wealthy patrons, and then B, were supported in other ways by people who didn't have as much money, whether they brought food or whether they periodically fixed something, we're back to that exchange we started with.
Right. And when I think of witchcraft, there's a lot of definitions we can use for what a witch is, and I often have a broad interpretation of it, but I also think of it, particularly in regards to this topic, as a vocation. There's people who practice, pagan philosophy, and there's people who practice folk magic and ritual at home. But there's certain people in our community now that are like the village wise woman and cunning man who people go to for spells and divination and, service. And that was always some form of exchange.
Right.
Places, I've had people say, well, why can't you just have people come over and weed your gardens? Well, I like to weed my garden. That's part of my time out in my garden with nature, and that doesn't necessarily pay my mortgage. At societies that you could trade a chicken and a loaf of bread, then that's what they did. But if we didn't have an end to that kind of village life and the coin of the realm became the dominant form of exchange, then people would be going to the village witch and healer and, paying money. So I don't think it's that different. I think it just is reflective of what society we live in right now.
Yeah.
And I think something sometimes changes too. I don't know if you found, since having both books out now, that there tends to be sometimes a crossover once you have books out, that people think you're independently wealthy or you're Stephen King or Anne Rice. And I had someone say after my first Llewellyn book came out, they're just like, "Oh, did you buy another house with your advance?" And I had to explain to them I couldn't pay a mortgage payment with my advance. Because people are interested in the topic, they think everyone's interested in the topic and assume that it's a more mainstream kind of, the books that we read are more mainstreamly received than they actually are. So I always find that kind of interesting. That's the reaction I get sometimes when I'm out in the town. I'm like, if you only knew.
I always love those figures that they come up with that includes, all published authors, including Anne Rice, Stephen King, those kind of people, that the average take-home pay of a writer is like $5,000 a year.
Yep.
So that includes people who are making billions of dollars.
Right. Yep. They average that in. Yeah. I'm not surprised by that at all.
Yeah.
But it's funny how people's perceptions are, and then if you take the time to just gently explain it, people are really surprised, but are a little bit more receptive and a little bit more educated.
Mm-hmm. You have as the heading of Chapter 1 in your forthcoming book, The Witch's Coin, The Secret of True Prosperity. And I'd like us to talk about that a little bit. I was looking at that again as I was preparing this morning to talk to you and thinking back on a time when I and one of my partners were living together and really struggling with finances and getting on our feet. And we would often open up our cutlery drawer and say, "Oh, my, we are rich in spoons." For some reason, we had a lot of extra spoons. I had no idea why. And it was our little joke, but it also was a way to say, you know what? In our own way, we're really rich.
Right.
We have a lot. And it set the stage for me for gratitude magic, which I think is the key to all successful magic. Is that having gratitude for what we do have and acknowledging what we have instead of always looking at what we lack.
Right. And actually looking at what we have and how it's serving us. It goes back to that necessity again. I think for me that true secret of the secret of true prosperity is really about that reciprocal nature and about that sense of exchange. A lot of what we've talked about to me is that sense of knowing, that I am taken care of in the universe, that I have so many gifts and so many blessings. I think gratitude is such a huge key. I'll share a funny moment of before I really got involved in coven work and I was just kind of a baby witch. We had this spirituality book club that my mom was a part of with me and a few friends. And it was at the time when Oprah was really big on her gratitude journal. I don't know if you remember that period, but she was very big about having people write down just in a journal 5 things that they were thankful for every day. And so the group decided to have a pact and to do that all together, and we did it for 3 months kind of very consistently. And that was very life-changing for me, particularly early on. I actually credit that with a lot of my transformation about money and prosperity and how to relate that to paganism, because I'd just really gotten into paganism at that time. And it was really understanding how blessed we are and how rich we are in so many different ways that don't necessarily relate to the bank account. And I found that when you're able to do that, then the issues with the bank account, whether they be high or low, you seem to transcend them. And then the money that you need on a physical level is there, just as the sun you need in the morning is there. The moon rises, all these things get taken care of, and we don't have to put a lot of worry into them. And we can kind of see the flow of prosperity as a tide, and really looking at it as a cyclical energy, and we want to maintain a certain base level. But I know for myself in writing and teaching, my prosperity is based on a cycle, and I tend to make more money in the fall because that's the time when everybody wants a witchcraft author to come up, and things tend to be a little scarcer during the summer and the winter, and starting to look at things as that cyclical nature and realizing, the tide will come in again. And but it took me observing and being grateful for the sun coming up and a beautiful day and a storm of lightning and wonderful people in my life and good food and all the things that seem so mundane, are really divine and perfect and reminded me and taught me so much.
The other thing that helps with that, Christopher, with that practice of gratitude and observance of what we have, what gifts we have in our life, is that it opens up life flow again. It opens up the channels of life force, and worry constricts life force. Worry and all the feeding and breeding of what we might call negative thoughts, if we really, it's not that they never arise, and it's not that we're never going to worry or get upset or angry at something, but when we feed and breed all of that constantly, it constricts our life force more and more so that less and less can flow in.
I would absolutely agree.
And
for me,
it actually arrests our personal development, and it arrests our ability to get what we think we want.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree. For me, I think of it, one of my early teachers described the fundamental forces of the universe, which I think are probably a little more complex than what I'm going to say now, but everything is about expansion and contraction. Everything's about love and fear. Mm-hmm. And the idea that whatever your consciousness is, either, as you said, restricts the life force. Any emotion, any thought, any feeling that we have, whether we want to label it as good, bad, or indifferent, is absolutely okay as long as we're allowed to feel it and then let it flow.
Right.
But it's when we hold on to things. Like when we have worry, it's okay to be worried about money. It's okay to be worried about life. It's okay to be worried about health, whatever those may be, because to acknowledge the reality of your situation is the first step into moving forward. But when you start to live in that place, that's the fear and that's the contraction, and that right. stops the flow of life force, it stops the flow of energy, it stops the flow of life, really. So if you can, I'm a big believer in processing what people consider to be negative emotions, and to acknowledge if you're angry, then be angry, but be angry and then let it go. If you're afraid, be afraid and then let it go. Don't get stuck your identity in that flow. I had another teacher who talked about emotion was energy in motion, and I've always kind of kept that in my mind, and realizing that what is emotion, what are thoughts, they're just different forms of energy. And like any energy that I run through my body, whether it's through the chakras or through the meridians, it needs to flow. If I stop, that creates that blockage that healthcare workers talk about in energy components and energy systems. You have a blockage, that life force can't flow. What is that blockage? It's a stuck feeling, it's a stuck thought.
Right. One thing that often helps too is going back to observing the trees, observing a stream, observing the flowers, and how they go through their life cycle. You mentioned that earlier, that the leaves need to fall off the tree and return to the soil, and the tree needs to get more nutrients in order to be able to bud again in the spring. Which brings me to the 4 Fs.
The 4 Fs. I love the 4 Fs, just because I like to say 4 Fs.
The 4F Club.
The 4F Club, exactly. Yeah, one of the keys for me in understanding a pagan perspective in prosperity comes from the Anglo-Saxon. I first came across it in Robert Cochrane's writings, because he used to sign off letters with a variation of this. But the 4 Fs basically stand for flags, flax, fodder, and frig. And basically, those are kind of the components of life, and to have a true, happy, successful, healthy. The flag stands for flagstones, which is a symbol for having a roof over your head, having a home. The flax is the spinning of the flax into clothing, to have clothing to shelter your body, but also having nice clothing, things that you like. The fodder is food, and originally it meant fodder not only for you and your family, but for your animals as well, to be able to provide food and sustenance for those who depend upon you. And then the frig, after the goddess, the idea that it was about love and sex and the idea of family on all those levels, that communion, that touch, it can really symbolize all those things. And I think if you look at your life in terms of that breakdown, you realize just how blessed you are, and prosperity really becomes about that balance. So many people will complain, yet do have, a roof over their head, and do have clothing on their back, and do have enough food, and do have, love and family and friends, and they don't realize what that blessing is. Mm-hmm. And I think if we're trying to sustain, those are our basic kind of fundamental human needs. And if we have those, what greatness we're having and what blessings we're having, and to really look at that before we start worrying about having X amount of dollars in the bank account, or having a particular type of job paying X amount of dollars a year.
I'd actually love to just sit with that for a moment. It's such a beautiful formulation, and I invite everyone who's listening, again, to take in a deep breath with me and just settle into yourself, into that still place in your belly, and feel your beautiful body in whatever state of health or ease it currently is in, and call to mind right now the first F, flags, your home. Where do you live? And just notice your home, whatever state your home is in and whatever relationship you have with it, and allow yourself, if you can, to be grateful for having whatever home you have right now. And call to mind the second F, flax, your clothing, the things your body enjoys, beauty, comfort, shelter for your body, as Christopher put it. And whatever your relationship to those things are, find a way to be grateful for what flax spins in your life. And call to mind the third F, fodder. And again, whatever your relationship is to food and to providing for yourself and those around you who are close to you, can you be grateful for the gifts of fodder? And call to mind the fourth F, frig, family, friends, love, enjoyment, sex. And again, whatever your relationship is to these things, can you find even one aspect for which to be grateful today? And breathe in your relationship to these four Fs, flags, flax, fodder, and frig. And let yourself expand a little bit, energetically and emotionally, to better receive them and to open your relationship to these four things. And imagine yourself in your best relationship with these four things. And I invite you to think of a spell or a prayer for prosperity that includes all of these, that will be your next step for manifestation in your life. So when we close this program, there's something you can enact, something you can bring forth that can be met by the gifts that are coming in. So Christopher, we still have a little bit more time, but not too much, and I'm wondering if there are any last thoughts you have on the witch's coin, on prosperity and money magic.
Well, I'm a big believer in intention followed up by actual practical real-world examples. And one of the things I've learned over the last few years is, as non-magical as this might sound, but for people who are struggling with these issues and on whatever level, I'd really encourage to see is the two things I've really encouraged a lot of students is to create what I think of as a life plan. And that life plan can be changed at any point. So a lot of people feel that they don't want to get locked into something that might not serve them later, but it's your life plan. You can change it however you'd like and whenever you'd like. But every year around the new year for me is Samhain. So around every time from Samhain to about Yule, I take that time to really plot out and plan where is my life going in contemplation, because to me it's a very dark, still time. What do I want it to be going? What I'm really listening to my will, listening to my consciousness, and kind of craft, just like if you were in a business, if your life was somewhat like a business, what is your mission statement? What is it here that you're here to do? And then from that mission statement, what are the specific goals that would help you fulfill that? And then I actually learned this from a wonderful author named Pat Monahan, who does a lot of goddess work. She talked about kind of looking at the different parts of your life like departments. And as strange as that might sound, family is a department, and the work that you do is a department, and leisure time is a department, and all the things that you want to have time for in your life, you have to kind of give them a priority and make them a department. And then kind of scheduling out and crafting your life plan to make sure you have time for all those things, to make rest and relaxation. I know for me it's been a real struggle at times to make that a priority, to make that a spiritual goal as well as a physical goal. And then through that process, when you're looking at your actual finances and figuring out how your finances will or at the time are not supporting what your life's goal is and how to change that, to actually go into the process of educating yourself a little bit more about money, a little bit more about investment, a little bit more about savings, wherever your financial needs might be right now. But a lot of people will do a spell and then not think to talk to a credit consolidator.
Right.
Yet the credit consolidator could be the key to getting out of debt if debt's an issue for you. Or if you really want a home, before you get your heart set on someplace, go talk to a mortgage specialist and try to get pre-approved and figure out what can I afford and what would be normal and how much do I need to save, and to start doing that planning. I've sadly found that a lot of people in our community don't necessarily plan out in that way. They think of planning somehow ruins spontaneity. And the great thing with the plan is you can always change it. You can be spontaneous when that serves your spirit, but sometimes it's good to have a little bit of a foundation and a mooring to know where you are and where you want to go and what are the steps in between those two. That's
great. Yeah, I like to think of will as intention in action.
Action, definitely.
And those departments you were speaking of, I talk about the planes of stability, which are the 6 sides that form the cube, that our life is the foundation for our life. And it's spiritual practice, physical health, mental and emotional health, work and money.
I love that.
And home and other relationships, and my relationship to nature.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I write about that in Evolutionary Witchcraft a little bit. And, I go through that with all my students. We have to figure out which of our planes are really supporting us, which of our planes need help, and what we're really able to stand on and develop. Yeah, so the cube of Earth is how I work with that.
That's great. I'll have to think deeper about that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me out. It was a pleasure.
And let's thank everything we called in. If you'd like to say your thanks now.
All right. Okay. Take a deep breath. We thank the Great Mother, the goddess of the earth, the goddess of the stars, the goddess of all things in between. We thank you for showing us the spark of spirit within matter, and matter within the heart of all stars. We thank the great Lord, the Lord of life, the Lord of death, the Lord of light, and the Lord of darkness, for opening the way. We thank you. We thank you for these blessings, both light and dark. May there always be peace between us. Blessed be.
Blessed be. And I'd like to thank Freyr and Freya, golden ones, gods of plenty. Thank you for your blessings and your insight. Go if you must, stay if you will. Hail and farewell.
Farewell.
And I'd like to thank all the elements of life, air, fire, water, and particularly earth and spirit and ether. You are always with us, and I give honor to you, and will notice you as you move in my life through the rest of the day today. And Holy Mother, in whom we live, move, and have our being, from you all things emerge, and unto you all things return. Blessed be.
Blessed be.
So again, this is Elemental Castings. I'm T. Thorn Coyle, and you can find my work and updates on my travel schedule and classes and my musings at thorncoyle.com. And you can learn more about Christopher and his work and all of his exciting projects, including the Temple of Witchcraft, at ChristopherPenczak.com. That's Christopher, Penczak. Thank you very much.
Solid, oh, you lovers, stand with me.